Good afternoon everyone. Prynhawn da i chi gyd, pawb sydd yma heddi, croeso cynnes iawn i'r cyfarfod hyn. This is an area that is hugely important to us in the Learned Society of Wales. We carried out an exercise like this last ref, and so we're very pleased to be doing it again for this occasion for the ref results that came out recently. This area is very important. It's very important to really to show the impact of the work of the Welsh universities, and it's a really great pleasure for us in the Learned Society of Wales to be able to pull all this together and to really show the range of impacts that universities have achieved. We've commissioned King's College London to delve into the details of this. So it's really great to be able to welcome Alex and Jonathan here today to be with us and to be able to hand over the baton to you shortly to actually go into all the details of what you've done. We really appreciate all of that. We're glad that you went through the 280 case studies or whatever the number was, and you've summarized all that for all of us. So really appreciate it. And then finally, before I hand over to Olivia, I want to really say a huge thank you to the funders, the people that also worked with us. That is to say, Higher Education Funding for Wales. Good to see people from Effaith here with us today, the Welsh Government and the Wales Innovation Network for their invaluable support in this project.
Thank you very much to everyone for joining us. As Hal said, there is a huge wealth of information in the reports that Alex and Jonathan and the other authors have produced for us. And we're really delighted with this work in what we can do then as the Society to promote that and dig into it in a bit more detail. So we held our launch event last Thursday. There is a summary of the report that we produced and launched at that event that's available on our website. If you'd like to see that, it includes a few case studies. Today is very much about the chance to understand how the work was done. Obviously, we've got Alex and Jonathan with us to explain that, and for people here to ask questions of the authors. But I just wanted to highlight that this is just the start of what we want to do with this huge amount of information that's been produced. There's lots more that we plan to get into, lots more detail to pull out. And so it's just the start of the journey. And if you would like to talk to us about doing any more work on that, any particular areas of interest or topics, please do let us know. So before I hand over, I just wanted to say, obviously, thank you again to Welsh Government, WIN and Effaith. I know we've got representatives from everyone here today, but I particularly wanted to flag that Hayley Moulding from Effaith, Effaith's Senior Research Manager, is here because Hayley is Effaith's representative on the Future Research Assessment Programme Board. So alongside colleagues from Research England, Scottish Funding Council and the Department for the Economy in Northern Ireland, for those of you that aren't aware, those 4 UK funding bodies were responsible for designing and managing REF 2021 and are currently designing the Future Research Assessment REF 2028. So today's session very much focuses on the analysis that's been done, which is of the impact case studies in REF 2021. So if this kind of brings up any REF related questions that are outside of that scope, whether it be about the other elements of REF 2021 or about the future REF, please do contact Hayley. We'll pop her contact details in the chat for you. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Alex and Jonathan to do their presentation. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
I'm Alex Pollitt. I'm Director of Research in the Policy Institute at King's College London, and most of my work is around research on research, impact, research evaluation, and so on. And along with Jonathan and a couple of other colleagues, we've been working on this study. And to be honest, the 280 case studies were really interesting to read. I'd recommend you all have a look at some of them. Okay, so as Olivia said, Jonathan and I are going to run through some of the main findings from the work. And we'll also make sure there's plenty of time for any questions that you have and also some discussion as well. So before we get into the findings, I think it's useful just to have a quick overview of the study. The main aim was to understand and communicate the contribution that Welsh universities make to wider society. So using the impact case study part of REF, looking at the kinds of impacts that come from research in Wales, the pathways to achieving that, and then who it is that benefits from that research. And we did that through two complementary strands of work. So one was this quantitative, large-scale text mining analysis, and I'll come on to methods in a bit more detail in a moment. And then the second one was a qualitative assessment of reading and coding all 280 of the case studies that came from Welsh universities. So we used 3 samples in the analysis. One was those 280 cases I've just mentioned from Wales. One was the full UK data set of case studies, so that was over 6,000 cases. And then we had a subset of the Welsh cases where they'd indicated that they'd received support from the Welsh government, and that was 80 cases. Today, though, we're looking at the first 2. So we're going to look at the Welsh cases in detail, and then also how that compares with the UK as a whole. So here are our 280 case studies. You probably have a sense of this already, but they're across 8 universities with well over a third of them coming from Cardiff. I think it's worth mentioning here, though, also what we're not looking at in this analysis. And what we're not doing is making any assessment of the quality of the impact that's reported in the cases. So you may well be aware that Wales did very well on the impact component of REF, with a slightly higher proportion of case studies scoring 3-star or 4-star than was the case across the UK as a whole. But in this analysis, we're not making any comments on the quality of impact. It's more around the types of impact and how this came about. So a word on methods. Oops, if I can get the slides to go. There we go. As I mentioned, we use these 2 complementary approaches, and the quantitative text mining underpinned the first 3 points that we've got on the slide here. So topic modeling is something that you may not have come across before, but essentially it's looking at patterns in text and identifying clusters of words that tend to occur in close proximity to one another. And then the more often and the more closely those words occur together, and the less often they occur in other contexts separately, the more tightly defined and well-defined that cluster or topic will be. And so then we can look at all of the words in that topic and give it a meaningful label. So as an example, if we found that the words school, teacher, curriculum, assessment, and so on all tended to occur together and not very often in separate contexts, then they might form as a cluster, and we might label that as education. And so that was the method that was used to define the 70 topics that we see in the report across the whole set of UK case studies. What's really important here, though, is that there was no predefined structure that was imposed on the text. So it wasn't a case of us saying, we've got some topics, let's find what fits into those topics. It was all of that emerged from the data. So it was a bottom-up process that came from the data, which in this case was section 4 of the impact case studies. So that's the bit on details of the impact. We used that same data to also do the geotagging. So in that case, we were looking for locations which were mentioned in case studies. And this was to give us an idea of the geographical reach of the impact in each case. And then finally, for the text mining, we also looked for fragments of citations that appeared in the text. Now, citations follow quite standard formats, so it's relatively easy to identify bits of citation. And then those were matched to a bibliographic database to allow an analysis of the research that underpins the impact in each case study. So that was the quantitative part that was done across the 6,000 plus UK case studies, including the Wales ones. And then, as I said, we had this qualitative approach just for the 280 Welsh cases. And this was reading and coding in detail, each case study looking for mentions of things like types of impact, sectors, mechanisms, beneficiaries, and so on. And so that gives us a bit more colour to the analysis alongside the comparative quantitative element. So I promise we'll get on to the fun stuff soon when we get to the findings, but just a few caveats to keep in mind before we do that. As we know, the impact case studies were written for assessment and to show universities in their best light. And so the impacts selected were on the basis of UKRI guidance, and very importantly, they're not comprehensive. So while our analysis looked at the full set of 280 case studies submitted from universities in Wales, that doesn't represent the entirety of impact created from Welsh research. It's only the top slice of it. So there are many, many examples of impact which won't be represented in our analysis here. Impact was also reported in a free text format, which is really useful for interesting stories and for getting some of the nuance around how these things happen. But it does mean that some of the detail isn't always consistently reported in different cases. And then finally, the templates themselves may have affected the kinds of impacts that were selected and then how those were reported as well. So just a few things to bear in mind as we go through some of the findings. On that, though, I will hand over to Jonathan, if I can, there we go, who's going to talk a bit about types of impact and pathways, and then we'll have a quick look at who benefited from research and a few concluding reflections as well.
Right, well, thank you all for joining us this lunchtime. As Alex said, what I want to do is to pick off some of the detailed analysis, looking at the types of research impact and introduce you as much to the data in doing so. So we go to the next slide, please, Alex. So what we focus a lot of our analysis on is so-called section 4 in the impact template, which details the narrative around the impact that many of you would have drafted a number of years ago now. And when we extract out that text from the 280 impact case studies coming from Welsh universities, we find about 194,000 words, around 19,000 unique words. And what we've done in this word cloud is take the most frequently mentioned words. And you can see here that the bigger the word, the more often it is mentioned. And to get into the map on the left, you have to have over 60 mentions. And straight away, you can see a number of things coming through there around international, around policy, around practice, around Wales, around research evidence, and such like. So it doesn't give you that much information, but straight away you get a sense of the sort of text that we have in our disposal when it comes to the analytics that we apply to those 194,000 words. So if we go to the next slide. So as Alex introduced, what we did was that we took this topic modeling technique, which is a language processing methodology that was largely developed in the digital humanities, but now is widely used in a number of other contexts, to look for these sort of clusters or combinations of words that occur within different case studies. And by looking at that, then we can pull them into what are called topics, as in topic modeling. And we identified 79 impact topics. For me, I've spent a lot of my career looking at research impact. Before we first did this approach in 2014, we used to use these conceptual models of impact, which typically would have 6 to 12 different buckets in which we would define different types of impact. So I find it really interesting that both in 2014, in this analysis, both at the UK level and an analysis we did last year in Hong Kong, we have a very similar process to the UK, we identify vastly more different types of impact when we do it in an empirically focused way. And I think that's really important from a sector point of view, because impact is very, very diverse. And we tend to focus on technology transfer or influencing policy, but it's much more diverse than that. The figure on the right takes those topics, so the big circles, which have a number of them, are a topic. Each of the small dots is an impact case study, and the color coding shows how they can relate to each other in cognate clusters, as we call them. And we identified, again, empirically 12 broadly cognate clusters. And if we go to the next slide, we can compare that map for the UK to the map for Wales, and don't analyze this too much, but visually you can see that actually the two maps are actually quite similar. Obviously, there are less dots in the Welsh one, but the distribution of impact topics is broadly similar, with some important exceptions. We go to the next slide. And so what we've done here is that we've basically compared the volume of the topics in Wales versus the UK. So you can see here the topic Wales has a 29 percentage point difference in Wales compared to the UK. So there's a comparative advantage, if you like, on that topic. Now, let me just clarify what we mean by that topic, because people have asked us. So again, going back to the empirical basis of topic modelling, it means that people in the case studies have mentioned Wales or Welsh or other words that can be associated with the nation of Wales. And that created a topic empirically. When we did the UK analysis, we had a similar topic for Northern Ireland and for Scotland, but we did not have a topic for England. So, and that's explained by the fact that people probably didn't mention that this impact was focused on England. So that's quite an unusual example, but obviously not unimportant to you guys. And then the other areas that we see where you've got comparative advantages around environmental conservation, energy, applied technology. In a similar sense, we can look at the disadvantage in the next slide. And if you look at the bottom of this, compared to the UK, you have relatively less impact case studies in topics around media and communications, around training skills, treatment and disease, reading bottom up. Importantly, if you take training and skills, you still have 39 of your 280 impact case studies in that topic. It's just relatively less than you'd get for the UK as a whole. And this is illustrated in the next slide, where we take individual topics and we map them against the unit of assessments. So if we take the training and skills impact wheel, as we call these, on the right-hand side of this graph, in the top, you have UOA 1 to 6, which is panel A, so broadly speaking, the life science and biomedical sciences. The blue color is the physical science and engineering sciences. Purple is the social sciences, and green is the arts and humanities. So panel A, B, C, and D. And what you see on the graphic is the percentage of case studies that are occurring in each of those units of assessment. And what you see in both of these examples, for Wales, which was the largest topic out of the 280, and for training and skills, is a reasonably broad distribution across the panels and across the units of assessment. So that topic is that the impact on that topic is coming from a number of research disciplines. If we go to the next slide, what you see here, at least in the applied technology example on the left, is much more concentration in panel B in the blue units of assessment. And you know, we have these impact wheels for all 79 of the topics. And you can see these different distributions, which in themselves quite interesting. In the digital environment on the right, interestingly, I found is that you have a relatively sparse engagement in life sciences, but the other three topic areas panels have quite a interesting distribution. So the important thing here is that these impact topics allow us to understand how research in different disciplines contributes to different societal impacts as defined by these topics. But the next thing we looked at is the relationship between the underpinning research and those impact topics. So if we go to the next slide, in the impact case studies, as you will be well aware, you could list up to 6 references saying this is the underpinning research. And what we did is that we took those 6 references, we extracted that information out of the text, and we, if there was a DOI, digital object identifier, we could relate that to bibliographic databases. If that information wasn't available, we could run it through other processes to create that relationship. And we managed to get a very, very high match of that information to bibliographic databases. And then using that, we could then map the journal in which the research was published to a field of research. And we use this taxonomy developed by the Australian New Zealand Statistical Bureau, which is quite widely used in scientometric analyses. And this taxonomy is useful because it has a hierarchical system of disciplines. So we talk about the 22 divisions down to 57 groups, down to over 1,000 different fields. We largely work at the 2-digit level, but we can go deeper if need be. But obviously, despite the massive data we have, you hit small number problems quite quickly. And the take-home message here, as illustrated in the title and the graphic, is actually when we compare those two distributions of the UK set against the Welsh set, they are remarkably the same. So 9 of the top 10 disciplines are the same, and there were some marginal differences, but nothing that really were significant in thinking about what we're doing. So we had these fields of research which allowed us to characterize the underpinning research, and then we had the 79 impact topics, and then we could start to sort of draw the pathway between those two things, which we did on the next slide. In this really complicated, but I do have to say I find this figure beautiful. I keep on wanting to turn it into a tie. If I ever have a tombstone, this is the sort of thing I want on my tombstone. But just to explain what we mean in this graph is on the left-hand side, we have those fields of research, the 157 fields of research at the 4-digit level. On the right-hand side, we have the impact topics, the 79 impact topics. And in the middle, we have the 32 units of assessment ordered by panels and using the same color coding as we did before. And what we find, I think, for me, that there's a number of observations to be taken from this very messy figure. First is the messiness. Impact is complex. We have multiple lines in this figure, and we have multiple unique lines. And from a policy point of view, I think that's really important because it means that these pathways are bespoke. There is no magic bullet we can say, if you do A, B, C, and D, you will translate your research. Each researcher involved in these crafted an impact pathway based on their context, on their research, and the various outcomes that they're involved in. The second thing is how the topics on the left have multiple lines from different disciplines going to them. So 3/4 of the impact case studies had 2 or more of these FOR codes, saying that basically impact is a multi-disciplinary activity. And you combine those two things, again, a policy observation, in my mind, that means you can't create impact metrics. Everybody wants these impact metrics. It reduces the burden, reduces the cost. But if we're going to be fair to every single discipline, we're going to need over 1,000 impact metrics to represent the 1,000 impact pathways, unique impact pathways that we have in this figure. So if we then go on to the next slide, I think I'm handing back to Alex at this stage based on her facial expression.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. So yeah, we've had a look there at some of the types of impact and pathways and things. And the other part we looked at was around who's benefiting from research in Wales. And one of the things that we coded for in the qualitative analysis was the different sectors that impact is occurring in. And we've got the top 12 sectors represented here. So you can see that health, education, and public administration and defence were the most commonly cited sectors of impact. This was fairly consistent across both types of impacts and also across different geographical reaches, but there were a couple of exceptions to that. So one thing that was quite interesting was when we looked at economic impacts in particular, and we found that the manufacturing sector was more prominent there. In fact, manufacturing was the most common sector for economic impacts around things like job creation and so on. Internationally, when we look at the reach of different impacts, the top 4 were the same. So the top 4 that we have in the table here were the same, whether we were looking at case studies in Wales specifically, in the UK, or internationally. It was those same top 4 topics, but then internationally, things began to change a bit as we went further down the table. And actually the 5th most common sector internationally was biodiversity, ecology and environmentalism. So quite interesting, I think, to see that there's proportionally a bit more impact in that area internationally. Keep sticking with that geographical theme. One of the other things we looked at, as I mentioned earlier, was locations that were mentioned within the impact, the details of impact section in the case studies. And that's what we've got in the 2 maps here on the slide. So the top one is looking at the Welsh case studies, and then the lower one is locations mentioned across the full set of UK case studies. Overall, for the Welsh cases, more than 90% had an impact in the UK, and over 70% had an impact specifically within Wales. And 60% had an impact internationally. So obviously that there's quite a lot of overlap between those 3 sets, but it's quite interesting, I think, to see, and nice that we're getting that local and global impact reported across the set of case studies. Broadly speaking, the distribution of countries was very similar for Wales and for the UK. So in each case, the UK, the US and Australia were the most common countries that we saw impact in. But there were a few cases where we saw a bit more impact than we might expect from Welsh cases. And so that was places like Spain, the Netherlands and South Africa. But as I said, it's fairly similar across both sets of cases there. So that's a very quick run through some of the main findings. I'm aware that there's a lot of data in there, and for those of you that have seen the report, there's quite a lot that we haven't had a chance to talk about as well. It's quite long, sorry about that. So just a few takeaway messages from us before we open the floor for questions and things. The first one is probably obvious, but I think not worth losing sight of by getting too much into the detail. And that's the fact that Welsh universities have a significant impact on society. And that's many different forms of impact. As Jonathan's talked about, it comes from multiple disciplines. And there's also a huge range of different pathways by which that impact is created. I think that's interesting in itself that we've got this variety of pathways, but as Jonathan said, it also has some interesting implications for how we think about assessing research as well. Partnerships are key to this. It's quite rare that we have impact created without some kind of non-academic interaction involved in it. So thinking about those relationships and how those help create impact is important as well. And then, as we've just seen, research carried out in Wales has impact both globally and locally, and it impacts across a range of different stakeholders, lots of different groups who benefit from it. And we haven't had time to go into the detail of that here, but we did take a look at different groups who benefited, so both those benefiting professionally, so policymakers and so on, and also those in the wider public, different demographic groups in Wales, in the UK, and also internationally.
Thank you so much, Alex and Jonathan, for that presentation. And please don't apologise for the report being long. It's full of a huge amount of useful information. So thank you.